So welcome everyone to today's short online seminar on how to name a file. This session is being recorded and you'll receive an email when the recording and the slides are available for future reference and later viewing. If you have any questions at any point throughout today's presentation, please enter them into the chat and I will answer them at the end. So I'm Julie Goldman, Research Data Services Librarian at Countway Library, and I've been offering a lot of these data management training classes, but I'm also available for the Harvard community for consultations on identifying best practices for data management, creating a data management plan, or finding data. So please feel free to reach out to me. I also co-chair the Longwood Medical Area Research Data Management Working Group. And this Harvard working group includes members of the LMA community from many areas, such as the library, information technology, research computing, research cores, and our affiliate hospitals. So it's a great partnership. And we have a website that's full of resources and information. So I suggest that you bookmark this website and reference it as you need. Okay, so let's review today's learning objectives. You'll understand why naming conventions are essential for data management. You'll learn best practices for naming files. And hopefully you'll be able to design naming conventions for your project or group. And I'll provide some resources and contacts to help you. So today we will really build on the folder organization structures we talked about last week and focus on principles and steps for creating awesome file names. And just a note that today's session is based on two other great resources I highly suggest: a data carpentry lesson for file naming and a naming convention worksheet from Kristen Brinney at Caltech Library. Okay, so one of the most important aspects of data management is helping yourself as a researcher. Research can be very messy. So in the time that you create files, they'll be in various formats, multiple versions, many methodologies, and so on. And the first person you will share your data with is yourself. So therefore, spending a little time, up front, can really save a lot of time later on. By creating clear and concise file names, you will be able to understand your data files if you have to, say, step away from the project. And by documenting your systems, you won't have to rely on your memory to remember what your file names or, acronyms mean. So here are some initial things to think about. You should be realistic. You need to strike a balance between doing too much and too little. And like all things with data management, there's no single right way to do it. So you need to establish a system that works for you. And think about who your system needs to work for. Is it just for you? Is it for your lab or group? Is it for your collaborators? And if you do share your work later on, can someone else outside of the group understand and use your data files now, tomorrow, and maybe in 5 years? So here are some examples of file names. So I have a quick poll. What do we think of these file names? Are they good examples or poor examples? Okay, great. Yeah, so these are really great file names. And yeah, for those who aren't sure, that's why you're here. So this is what we're going to talk about. So there are three principles for naming files. They should be human readable, play nice with default ordering, and be machine readable. And the examples on the slide meet these three principles. And you will see these examples throughout today's session. So we are going to go through a few steps for creating file conventions that satisfy these three principles. So step one, first you need to identify the group of files you want to use a naming convention for. You can use different conventions for different sets of files. It is always a good idea to check for established file naming conventions within your discipline, or if they've already been established within your group. And I will bring this up throughout today's presentation and all of the steps, but please remember to document your conventions so that others in your lab or department can follow the standard that you come up with. So for example, in step one, you may say, this convention will apply to my microscopy images or files from raw image through the processed image. So next, we need to identify the information or the metadata that is important for these files and makes each file distinct. Your file names should be descriptive and provide just enough textual information. Ideally, you should pick 3 pieces of metadata and no more than 5. And this metadata should be enough for you to visually scan the file names and easily understand what's in each of them. And this is what we mean by human readable. As humans, we want names to contain some information about the contents in a file. And this is related to the concept of a slug from our URL in a website. A slug is the part of a URL that identifies a particular page on a website in an easy to read form. In other words, the part of the URL that explains the page's content. So we want our file name metadata to do a similar thing. We might say, for my images, I want to know the date, the sample ID, and the image number for that sample on that date. So let's dive deeper into what human readable names look like. So here are some examples of good and poor file names. Some files have more information than others, right? So which set of file names do you want at 3 a.m. before a deadline? So when you're in a time crunch, being able to find and understand the file names you need quickly is very imperative. So from the previous slide, here are the files that contain that key information about the contents in a file. And this is what I mean by embrace the slug. So yes, our file names do get a little longer with more information, and we might introduce some acronyms or abbreviations, but we are really adding that context to the file name. So like a slug, we are leaving a trail behind for yourself and others to figure out what the contents of a file is. And that trail of information is for you and others to quickly decipher what's in that file. Okay, step 3. So as I mentioned, you may need to incorporate some abbreviations or codes to ensure you are capturing all of the descriptive information that you need. So if any of the metadata from our previous step is described by lots of text, you should decide what shortened information to keep. And if any of the metadata from step 2 has regular categories, you should standardize the categories or replace them with maybe some number or letter codes. And again, be sure to document these codes because you need to remember what they mean later on. So an example here is the sample ID. We'll use a code made up of a 2-letter project abbreviation, a 3-letter species abbreviation, and a 3-digit sample ID. And you can see we're using P1 and P2 for the projects. We're using MUS for mouse and DRS for fruit flies. And then we are also using that sample ID as assigned in our lab notebook So there's some nice connection here between our file names and what we are documenting within our lab notebook. Okay, so step 4 focuses on if and how you will track multiple versions of your files. So you can track versions of a file by appending version information to the end of a file name. This could be contextual information, but I would consider using, a version number, for example, V01 or V02. Or you could also use the date the file was created or then edited for the version date. And we'll talk about this in a bit, but be sure to use the ISO 8601 standard or format, which is year, month, day. And we will talk more about these numbering systems in the next step. Okay, so our example for capturing versioning of files may be written as each image goes through my analysis workflow, I will append the version type to the end of a file name using raw, processed, or composite. All right, so in step 5, we need to determine how you want your files to organize and sort. So remember, the computer arranges files by name, character by character. So the order of your file metadata is very important. So decide what metadata should appear at the beginning of a file and put the most important information first. And here you want to also think about default ordering. So do we want files to arrange alphabetically, numerically, or chronologically? So if you anticipate wanting to find your files by date, then you need to put the date first within your file name. And again, using the ISO 8601 standard, formats your dates with that 4 digits for a year, 2 digits for a month, and 2 digits for a day. And that will allow your files to sort chronologically. If sorting numerically and have a number listed first, you should also be sure to pad that number with zeros on the left. So using leading zeros will ensure your files sort in a nice sequential order. So an example of determining how you want your files to sort would be, my sample ID is most important, so I will list that first, followed by the date and then the image number. Okay, so let's look closer at some of that default ordering that I'm talking about. So again, putting something numeric first in your file names allows you to easily sort your files in a logical order. And if you don't use that left pad in your numbers, you get a jumbled list, which isn't helpful anymore. And this isn't just helpful when trying to logically order your files. It's also important when including a number within a file name. As we saw for the versioning, I suggested a 01 instead of just a 1, because what if you have 10 or more versions of something? So providing a 0 as a placeholder allows you to build space for those future files. All right, so let's look closely at sorting chronologically. And this is one of my favorite best practices for data organization, using the ISO 8601 standard for dates. Again, the standard is 4 characters for the year, 2 characters for the month, and 2 characters for the day. So why do you think we should use this standard for date format? I'm going to go to our next poll to see what you all think on why we should use this standard for date formats. Kind of already given you some good ideas, but maybe there's some other benefits. Okay, awesome. Yeah, let's take a look. Yeah. So obviously sorting files in chronological order is one of the biggest benefits, but I kind of tricked you all here. All of the things listed are benefits for using this, this standard. So it allows for nice sorting, chronological order, and the format is extensible. So no matter the specificity of the date you give, the files will still order chronologically. So you could just have the year and the month, or the month and the day, and you still get that nice chronological order. The standard also allows us to compare dates and date values using, math to do calculations on it. It allows for smoother analysis so that you could work with dates more easily. And then even some software packages expect your dates in this format. For example, the LubriDate library in R. So this format is awesome. You should be using it if you're not already. And it is an internationally recognized standard. So this image of a map shows all of the countries that use the month, day, year format. And as you see, it's really only used in the United States. So in addition to benefits like the sorting and the versioning that we just talked about, international projects will really benefit from using this naming convention standard. All right, so let's go back to our steps and talk about those dashes breaking up elements within your files. So this step is to determine what characters you will use to separate each piece of metadata within your file names. So our computer systems cannot really handle spaces in file names. So to make our file names machine readable, we use dashes, underscores, and or capitalize the first letter of each word in the file names, also known as camel case. Also for machine readable names, we want to avoid special characters. So, that's like periods, question marks, exclamation points, and so on. So an example here is I will use underscores to separate metadata and dashes between parts of my sample ID. So let's focus on machine readable. Why is this important? Machine readable file names allow you to easily search for files later, easily narrow down files based on their names, and easily extract information from the file names. So functionally, machine readable files are regular expression and globbing friendly, which I'll walk through in a minute. For these to be successful, we need to avoid those spaces, punctuation, or special characters that I've already mentioned. And machine readable file names are easy to compute against if there is that deliberate use of delimiters like the dashes or underscores. So let's take a look at how this works. So first, we could see how searching for file names on our computer can be enhanced by clear, consistent file names. So for example, if we search using the Mac OS Finder search facility, we search our data folder for the word plasmid, and the system returns all of the files with the word plasmid in them. Pretty handy. We could also do this on the command line. So I mentioned regular expression and globbing. We won't be going into depth here, but just to share these two additional strategies for how you could work with your files. So file name globbing is used for matching file names using wildcards. And the asterisk character is a wildcard. It matches 0 or more characters. So typing asterisk.csv matches file plasmid.csv, cellline.csv, and so on. And here we see an example of globbing to narrow down a file listing. So on the shell, we could navigate to a directory and type a command to list any files with the word plasmid somewhere within our file name. Using the wildcard character asterisk, on both sides of plasmid indicates we don't really care where plasmid shows up in the file name. So the command ls asterisk plasmid asterisk will print a nice list of all the files with plasmid within our file names. And we can do the same thing using R's ability to narrow file list by regular expression. So regular expressions are used in commands or functions for pattern matching in text. So in our example, if we want to create a list of file names with plasmid in the name using R, we write the function list files and the regular expression pattern. And only file names that match the regular expression will be returned. So here we are asking for the head or the first few lines of the output. And again, we see our list of files with plasmid in the name. So I hope that demonstrates how you can use your delimiters to help you manipulate and search for files more easily. All right, and finally in step 7, you want to make sure you write down your naming convention and document it in maybe a README file. And keep that README file with your other files so that everyone in the lab, department, or group can also use and understand the system you have created. So a final note overall on file names, make sure the convention only uses alphanumeric characters, dashes, and underscores. And ideally, we don't want to make the file name too long, since operating systems have different limits for number of characters you can include. A nice general rule is to try to aim for 40 to 50 characters. You can keep it shorter, that's even better. And on the slide are some examples of how you can document your convention for everyone to follow. So there's a nice template, and then some examples of how to apply that template. All right, so on a final note, and I usually get this question, so I want to make sure I cover it. I really suggest if you are looking to, start using standardized file names, that you start, today or tomorrow with a new file naming system. And then you can move forward confidently. Ideally, you should not really be going back and naming files, as this can be cumbersome and time consuming. So that's just a suggestion, but if you do have to change many files downstream, there are some solutions available to help you bulk rename files to something more consistent and in line with that, with the best practices that we discussed today. So there's 2 examples on the slide, one for a Mac and one for Windows, but there is a list of additional file naming, renaming tools on our website that you can check out. Great, so with all of our sessions, I've been providing a nice checklist for you to use to follow the principles and the steps that we talk about in the webinar. So this worksheet also has some templates to follow and good and bad examples to get you on the right track. So hopefully this is a useful resource that you should and can include in your group or lab protocols to ensure that everyone is following the standard conventions that you create and understand what is a good and a not so good example. So finally, I will summarize the topics that we discussed in today's session. So remember the 3 principles for our file names. They should be human readable, play nice with default ordering, and also be machine readable. I suggest you check where established file naming conventions in your discipline or your group already exist. Your naming conventions should be documented so that everyone can follow your standards. And remember that your file names should be descriptive and provide just enough contextual information to be readily useful. And as a final tip, I will add, you should also check your instruments or software or other equipment that you're using to see if the data outputs can be set with a file naming system. In some cases, they cannot be, and they just kind of spit out a generic code that you might need to go back and change down the line. But good to check. So all of these strategies are easy to implement. So now you are really ready, hopefully, to go forth and use some awesome file names. And there are 3 more webinars this month. Join our guest presenter, John, a staff scientist at Boston Children's Hospital, to talk about creating metadata README files next week. So he'll be talking about README files and how you can ensure that your naming conventions and your files are listed appropriately within your READMEs. So hope to see you next week for that. So thank you for joining today's session. The recording and the slides will be posted to our website and sent to everyone on the call. And I would appreciate your feedback on today's session. So please fill out the survey at the link provided on the slide.